Hello, and Mr. Matt is back. Thank you, friends. So today we have moved on from some of our introductory actions where we are learning to control the screen. And today we're going to make a new design, and we're going to focus on this cool option called holes. And how do we cut holes? So a lot of our things that we've been using before in the previous videos have been basic shapes. Things like a cube, all right, or a cylinder, or a sphere. And we have these basic shapes. And what's kind of fun is that we could imagine, building simple objects, very similar to things that we have seen before. We could almost imagine that this is a head here on top of a body, right? And then we can actually have two cubes, and these could almost be legs. And we can imagine like seeing the world in like collections of simple shapes. And that's an easy thing to do. So let's for example, I have my sphere here, and I want this sphere to be a little bit larger, like this. I'll go ahead and remove these objects here. And then if I go ahead and Control C that, and I add another sphere here, and if I shrink that sphere just a little bit, I'm going to put that sphere right on top of another one. Let's actually move him up. And then I'm going to create another sphere. And again, I'm going to make him just a little bit smaller. You can almost imagine, you can almost see what shape I've created here. This is a snowman. And then we could imagine that snowman has a hat on top. Maybe let's go ahead and make that a little bit smaller. We'll move it up a little higher, and we'll put that hat there. And maybe I can bring in a cone, right? And I'm just going to rotate around. Let's put that hat right there on top. Let's bring this cone over. But, his cone nose is very small. We can bring it up, and we can rotate that over. Let's see if we can get that pretty close to where his nose is. And so we can about imagine I've just created a snowman. And I've used basic shapes to do that. And we can imagine that. And we can view the world in terms of simple shapes that have light refinement that makes them a little bit more specific and more what we expect. But we can imagine all these shapes as collections of simple shapes. But in the real world, we very often don't work with perfect basic shapes. And a lot of times we need to go ahead and cut pieces off of our shapes because that's more in line with the design that we need to create. And so I'm going to go ahead and create that. I'm going to show you how we cut shapes to be more what they want. So here it is. I have a cylinder, right? Very simple, straightforward. I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. And I've gone over here and I've brought in a gear. And we can see that this gear is about, roughly the same shape. It's round. It has some standoff. But we see this uniqueness in the gear where it's got the teeth and it's got these cutouts and these notches and it's got a center cutout and it looks like it's got a little bit of like an offset kind of curved cutout that would go into, whatever sprocket or axle or whatever it's meant to go into. But we can see that our gear has the same similar shape as our cylinder. The question is, how do we go from this simple shape to something that's more complex, like our gear, right? And I'm not going to walk you exactly through how to take this into a gear. Luckily, Tinkercad has a gear option, a gear shape here under hardware, and I can drop in gears that have been pre-built for me, and I can go ahead and use those in my design. But just to understand that very often we may need to take a shape and we may need to modify that shape and customize it to the design that we need. And I want to go ahead and show you exactly how we do that. And the simplest way to do that is, how do I turn this cylinder into a donut? into something where I've popped out the center of that cylinder, similar to this gear right here. So I'll go ahead and get rid of that gear. Now, as I select my cylinder, and you can imagine, let's start with a simple screen. So if you're sitting there at home and you go ahead and pause, you can go ahead and rewind. Feel free to do that anytime. We have a clean workspace, and I'm going to come up here and make sure that I'm in the basic shape. So I've selected the carrots here on the right, and I select basic shapes, and I want to start with the cylinder. So I'm just going to drag that cylinder out and put it roughly in the center of my design. And now what I would like you to do is I want to make this cylinder bigger. I want to make it wider and taller. And so I can do that a number of ways. I can grab this corner and drag it out. But what happens is I'm creating it, almost like stretched and skewed. It's hard to make it perfect. Okay, let's do Control Z and go back to where we were. I can click on this corner and you can see it shows me the dimensions in one direction and it shows me the dimensions in the other direction. These values I can modify to make exactly what I'm looking for. So if I want it to be 40, I can go in there and select the 20 in the screen. I just click on it, and then I can go over to my number pad and type 40, hit enter, and you can see it skews. And because I want that to be the same in both directions, both X and Y, I will come in here and say 40 again, and now I have a bigger cylinder. There's another way I can do this by holding down the Shift key and then grabbing the corner. It allows me to scale my object quickly while holding the proportions of both the height, the width, and the length of the cylinder. So there's many ways I can reshape things. I can enter in the values directly. I can just drag and drop. I can go ahead and hit Shift and have it scale. There is no right or wrong answer in this example that we're trying to do. And so I want you to just kind of play around by making your cylinder a little bit larger. Okay? So now I have that cylinder is a little bit larger, and I'm just going to set it aside here, and then I'm going to drop another cylinder inside. And so I have two cylinders. One is larger, one is smaller. And you can notice I can select either of these cylinders just by clicking on them. That's awesome. And each time that I select one of the cylinders, it updates the window here on the top right under cylinder, the cylinder and this cylinder. Okay, and we notice we have two options here. One is called solid. So this is a solid object meant to be have shape and be filled all the way through. So it does a solid shape. The second one is the hole tool. And this is what we use for us to turn this shape into something that we use to cut out. And we can imagine this kind of like Play-Doh. Imagine I have the cutting tool in Play-Doh where I'm cutting out or I'm punching a hole, or like a cookie cutter, and I'm cutting out the piece that I want to remove. So this is my solid, and this is what I want to remove from my solid. And so I go ahead and change this second cylinder to a hole. And now you will see as I zoom in, it's transparent. I can see through it. It has this checkered lines. It's got the slices here, and I can see through the object. And what that is done, it has said that this object here isn't a solid. It is something that I want to use to cut out of our cylinder. So let's go ahead and see how do we do that, okay? And very simply, I'm just going to take this cylinder and I'm going to drag it into my other cylinder. Okay, so now that it's sitting inside, all right, you can see it's kind of poking out the top, and you can change the height of that cut. You can make it larger. You can resize it as well if you want to make it bigger or smaller. So the hole can be reshaped and resized just like our solids. So imagine it like a solid, but in a negative, where it's something that this is the space I want to remove. And so when we're thinking about our design, we're not just thinking about the positive solid, the thing that we want to make, but also thinking about what we want to remove. Very often we want to remove material, almost like a sculptor, where we are cutting away and chipping away on our solid in order for us to create the new shape, the new object that we want to make. So we're not worrying about it being perfect. We'll learn about how to make it perfectly in the center, but you can kind of move it around, kind of find about where you think it might be the center, and that's totally fine. We don't have to make it perfect today. So once I have that object in the middle, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my select tool. And if you remember that from the earlier video, I take my cursor and I click with my left finger and I drag it out and I just select. I make sure I try to select both objects. If I just do here, I'm just going to select the outer shape. And you can see that because the blue line is around the shape, but my inner shape has not been selected, okay? So when I select, I want to make sure that I include at least some of that shape in there so that I can multi-select, which means I've now selected multiple objects in my workspace. And you can see that the blue line is around the outer object and the blue line is around the inner object, and that is indicating that I have selected both objects. Now that I've selected both objects, I'm going to come up here to my group or union tool, and I'm going to hit this button. And we're going to see what happens after we join the two objects. And what you see here is that the whole tool has cut out from my shape based on where it was placed and how it was oriented. And you can see now, I can move the shape up and we'll look below. And now I have cut essentially a donut hole through the middle of our cylinder. We kind of look like a pipe. You can think of it as like a pipe maybe you see at the hardware store, or like a foam, a noodle or something that you might play in the pool where it's got a hole cut through the middle of it. And we can see all the way through. And so we've removed the material. Now, the removal of the material doesn't have to be just in the center. So here, I'm going to bring another cylinder in, make it a little shorter. I'm going to copy that cylinder, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. Oops, I wanted to hold the ratio there. Okay, right about there. And I'm going to change it into a hole. And I'm going to move it here. I want to make sure that it's at least tall as my object. And you can see what I'm going to do here. What am I making? I'm going to make kind of a moon-shaped object, right? So it's going to cut out, but it's actually beyond the material, and that's okay. That means that if there was any material in here, it would disappear. But since it's not, it's okay. It's all going to be cut away. And you can see I'm in the material on my cylinder here. Let's go ahead and select both objects, join them, and you can see the Cookie Monster has come and taken a big bite out of our cylinder. And we can use this to create very unique shapes. So now you can see I have this new shape that I've created because I've used the tool. And what's cool about this? Well, I can resize this. So now I've made a little, you can almost imagine like a moon shape that goes onto your wall, that you can paint in some, glow-in-the-dark paint or something, and you can hang that on your wall. You could imagine this being kind of like a little pipe or something, or a cup. So let's go ahead and drop another cylinder here. And again, let's make it a little bit larger. Let's drop our next cylinder here. I'm going to turn that into a hole. I'm going to drag that here. I'm going to drag it up a little bit. I'm going to drag it over and sit in the center. Now, what's the cool thing about this? Is the hole is only going to go this far down. So you can imagine, what am I making? I'm making a cup, right? So if I'm going to push this further down, I'm going to drag this further up, and then I'm going to join the two of them in a group. And you can see I've cut out the cylinder, but I've left a bottom. And we can see that the bottom is still intact. So if I were to take this to a 3D printer, this would act like a cup. And so I could actually fill it with material, or I could fill it with water, I could fill it with anything. So I've chosen to leave some at the bottom of that cylinder available. Now in this example over here, I cut it out all the way to the bottom. This one I did the same here, but in this one, I only cut out part of it. And that in your design may be needed. You may need to leave some of that bottom available so that, maybe something slots in, or maybe that's the dimensions of your design. That's the requirements of what you've had to do. So I encourage you to go ahead and play with this. Really experiment and realize you can do this with any shape. So I can create another cylinder here. I can turn that into a hole, or a cube in this case. I'm going to join the two, and you can see I just cut out another piece. Now, does that mean you have to use the same shapes? Absolutely not. I'm going to put out a cylinder here, and I'm going to put out a square, or a cube and a cylinder here. Let's join the two of them. Which one do you want to be the hole? Let's make the cylinder the hole. Let's join those together. And we can see we are cutting out shapes. You can take any of the shapes. You can imagine this being the top of a roof, right? And maybe you have a little chimney that you're building here as part of your design, right? Something small, make it really tall, and I need to have a hole in my chimney, right, for my design. Whatever you're choosing to do, let's go ahead and turn that cylinder again into a hole. And let's multi-select them. Let's join them together. And now you can see I've got a nice hole that I can place, a pencil in, or whatever design you're trying to do. And we can see how we can use all these awesome basic shapes to cut holes out of things and actually create punches that we may need in design. And so in the next video, what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about, instead of punching holes, we're going to be talking about making cuts and slices. We're going to use the same method, but we're going to think about it in a different way. So stay tuned for that.